Okay, so this is going to be a video demonstration and some content as well on how to analyze qualitative data. And so there, I'm specifically focusing on or introducing you to how you could analyze qualitative data if you're conducting a phenomenological qualitative research study, which I'm anticipating if anybody doing qualitative research for their project would be doing some type of phenomenology or exploring the lived experiences from the participants themselves. And so hopefully after this particular lecture and demonstration, you'll appreciate just how diverse qualitative data analysis can be. I'm going to introduce to you different authors, different methodologists, if you will, that give certain guidance on how to analyze data. But I'm also going to show you just the overarching general type of thematic analysis. And that's what we'll be doing for the sake of our assignment. We'll be looking at maybe comparing and contrasting, and I'll point out some differences in more of that general thematic analysis versus a more focused phenomenological research analysis approach. And then overall, when you guys go through this process of thematic analysis to show proof of your assignment or to complete your assignment and show proof of your work and meeting our accreditation standard, I'm going to have you create a figure of your data analysis, which will display your overall results and how you acquired and assimilated all of this qualitative data. So when we're conducting phenomenological data analysis, we are holding true to our phenomenological research design. And so the purpose of phenomenology, right, is to provide a view into the lived experiences of a particular individual or individuals, a group of individuals. Okay, and so we want to find out what their experiences are, what they lived through. We want to hear it from their perspective because they're ultimately the expert in their life, right? They're the ones that lived through their experiences, which have made them who they are. And so that really gets at the heart of phenomenology. Phenomenology is meant to gain a really deep meaning into the meaning of these people's lives. Okay, and so I think when we're doing phenomenology and we're starting out, it's easy to just skate the surface, but really this method should be used at really gaining deep, rich experiences from our participants. And so when you're looking at different ways of analyzing data, right? And so when we are hearing the experiences from individuals, we're clearly interviewing them, right? We're observing them during those interviews. With phenomenology, you could be doing some observations in that natural environment as well. But more often than not, for the sake of our research designs and phenomenological research design moving forward, most students are conducting one-on-one interviews. Okay, there have been some students who have done focus group interviews. Again, the whole purpose of phenomenology is to hear the experiences from the individuals as they're viewed as the experts in their life. And so with phenomenological data analysis, so analyzing those interviews, analyzing those observations, we can view it through the lens of descriptive phenomenology or interpretive phenomenology. And so these are the more famous authors or methodologists, I would call them, that give you more specific how-tos or ideas on how to analyze your data through this descriptive phenomenology lens. Okay, and so Colazzi, Georgi, Van Kam, Moustakis, Dahlberg, they all give examples of how to conduct a descriptive phenomenological data analysis. For my dissertation, I use Moustakis and his method, and I'll talk a little bit about the different methods, but essentially their lens is helping us figure out how to describe the meaning of our participants' lives, or describing what the phenomena is that was experienced by all, okay? Interpretive phenomenology is sort of another lens. It's also known as hermeneutics. And so their lens, and again, it walks you through an analysis on how to do more interpretive. I feel like for students starting out with phenomenological data analysis, this one becomes a little bit harder. You dive a little bit deeper. It feels a little more uncomfortable because as the data analysis specialists, we have to sort of take that extra step and interpret and provide that interpretation of what our participants are saying and what they're experiencing. And so that can be a little bit deeper, or a little bit, and feel a little bit more uncomfortable than just simply describing what we've been told, okay? There's also a general qualitative data analysis, and this is where I would say most of our research preceptors in our OT program do some type of general qualitative data analysis. Creswell and Creswell-Baez go through a particular method on how they analyze their data, okay? Creswell and Creswell-Baez have a different method on analyzing their data, where they go through their transcripts, so they're typed out interviews, and they come up with more, they call them themes, okay? And really when they're sharing their themes, they're not the thematic statements that we sometimes read about in articles. They're a little bit different. And so if you get anything from this lecture, what I want you to get is there are different ways on analyzing qualitative data, okay? It can fall under the lens of descriptive, interpretive, or it can fall under more of an umbrella general term on how we analyze data. So I pulled out these different authors for you so you understand that what your research preceptor does and guides you to do might be different than what's in your Creswell text, okay? I don't necessarily follow the Creswell-Baez and analysis measures, okay? I do more of a general thematic analysis that sort of uses pieces from maybe descriptive phenomenology. And I think what gets difficult is sometimes these different authors use different words to describe the same process. And that process, that same process, is thematic analysis. Okay, so again, if you're taking anything from this lecture, know that there are many, many, many different ways on doing thematic analysis with your qualitative data, and your research preceptor will be able to guide you and help you figure out how to do that. What you can bring to your research preceptor is perhaps a specific phenomenological data analysis, or having some awareness of who these famous people are, so you can research further, perhaps, and gain more how to do the data analysis with a particular methodologist, okay? So when you're doing a really quality study, right? So when I had to do my dissertation, right, I was held to the standard of, I had to identify a particular phenomenologist and follow their methodology and follow their data analysis to the T, Okay, and that was best practices for research, was holding true to your methodologist. And so for the sake, not all of our research preceptors feel that way. Not all of our publications that are qualitative studies follow that. And that's just that's the reality of it. And so what we read a lot in articles sometimes falls down to more of the general qualitative analysis. Okay, so more than one way to get from all of your interview transcripts, right, to your analysis. All these different ways on how to get there, all viewed through different lenses. So again, your research preceptor is going to be key in helping guide you, but here are some key authors and methodologists that you may find helpful. So when we're preparing the data for our analysis, again, our data is going to be the recorded or the typed out interviews from our recorded interviews. Okay, and so they're going to be transcribed exactly. It's helpful if we transcribe soon after the interview as possible. We've sort of talked about that already, how it might be fresh in your mind. So as you're listening to the interview and you're typing your interview, if it cuts out in some way, you may just simply remember what was said, as opposed to you missing that key data. Okay, so that's a good part of it. If you transcribe sooner than later, transcribe it right away. It tends to stick in your brain a little bit longer for longer periods of time. So that's also a key benefit on getting on that interview and recording it right away. Make a copy for your file or save on your computer. And so once you type, once you record that interview, you might want to transfer that onto your computer. And if you're using a digital recorder, that works very slick. So you have two copies, right? One copy on the dictaphone, if you will, and the other copy saved as a file on your computer. I've talked about some issues on some of my course mates who have lost data. And when you lose data, you lose that interview. That's a huge loss. And it's not the same if you ask that participant to do the interview all over again. You're not going to get as good and rich of data as you would have that first time. And so make sure you have those copies and backup copies. This is really important in qualitative research. I'm speaking from personal experience. Review your research question frequently. Know your research question by heart so you know what is important from the data. So I always, as I'm typing out my transcript for my interview, as I'm reading my transcripts, I always have my research question handy. I always have it written down. I'm always reviewing it. That way I'm always looking at my data through the lens of my research question. Okay, you're going to be hearing stories from people that you interview. They may not have anything to do with your research question. Okay, not saying that they're not important, but it's you're not going to want to focus so much on that information or on that data if it's not relevant to answering your question. Okay, and so when we're listening to people tell stories, and I know you get this from me, I kind of go off on tangents sometimes, right? And so interviewees do the same thing. When they're being interviewed and it's live, they may kind of go off on a tangent, right? And so, be listening for that, try and get them back on track. But then also, when you're analyzing that data or getting ready to analyze that data, if you don't think it really contributes to what you're looking for to answer that research question, it's something that you can sort of skip through, okay? So as you're, again, reviewing or reading through the transcripts and you know what your research question is, as you're reading through the transcripts, you likely will be able to mark those interesting passages, or like, oh, wow, that would be a good explanation for my research question, or that really gets to the heart of a research question. So you would want to highlight or sometimes mark those particular passages that are tied very closely to your research question. When you're writing when you have your transcripts, you're reading them, you will likely make notes in the margins. Okay, so some of the notes usually are what's going on here? What is this section about? What is my research participant? What are they getting at here? Okay, and so it's not just copying word for word what your research preceptor, or I mean, I'm sorry, what your interviewee said. And students have a tendency of wanting to do that, where they'll read a section of transcript and they'll say, say the participant was sharing a story about, completing international service learning in Peru was really exciting. Okay, and so then the student would write down in the margin, exciting. All right, and so well, that's just repeating what the participant said, but instead get a little bit deeper and ask yourself, what's going on here? What do I think my what do I think my participant is getting at? Why do I think this was exciting for them? And so you might also then, you might have your field notes, which are your observations that were taken during your interviews, okay? Those would be where you might also make notes in the margin, like sarcastic, meaning actually was the opposite. Okay, so something along those lines, or awkward laugh, right? And so on the right-hand side or in the margin, you might say awkward laugh might mean this was uncomfortable. Okay, so you might have those hunches, and those would be good for you to add and just simply handwrite in the margins of your transcript. Okay, those hunches will really help you piece everything together at the end when you're analyzing all that data, and you may come up with some commonalities with all of your participants that you're reviewing, all of that data. Okay, and that may help you come up with those statements. So the purpose of thematic analysis is to just reduce the data, okay, into some meaningful way. And so when we're reducing data, the reason why we need to reduce it is it's not uncommon for us when we give an interview to somebody and we type out their responses, there might be it might be 30 pages double spaced of that interview, or even 50 pages double spaced. And if we have roughly 8 to 10 participants, okay, times 50 pages, that's a lot of words. That's a lot of data. And so we have to sift through, and we have to read through those pages and pages and pages of words and words and words, and sort of reduce what has been said, organize it, and sort of help us go through a process to help us rebuild it into meaningful ways. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of conducting a thematic analysis, is to break down what's been said by your participants, organize it, and build it in a more meaningful way that answers your research question. Okay, and so sometimes when we rebuild it, a lot of times we will rebuild it into thematic statements. Okay, and so these are statements, overarching themes that we derive from our participants' experiences. This is where we're going to focus our research project, our class project, is doing a thematic analysis where our end product is going to be themes or thematic statements, okay? Now, when we're using a different methodologist, I know Moustakis talks a lot about using textual and structural descriptions or definitive statements. And so they go through this process, or he takes you through this process on textual and structural description. So what is occurring here and how is it occurring? Okay, and so that would help you sort of code or come up with, in the margins, make those notes of what is the participant talking about? What is occurring? How is it occurring? Okay, what and how? Texture and structure. At the end, when you go through that textural and structural descriptions of your transcripts, you would eventually get into definitive statements. Okay, and those are statements that you are claiming to be legitimate because of what your participant said. Okay, so I argue that, again, all of these authors Kolazzi, Georgi, Van Kam, Moustakis, Dahlberg, Van Marten, or Manin, Benner, Smith, Flowers and Larkin, Nystrom, they all call it something different. But what they're trying to do is reduce the data to make it more manageable and build it into something more meaningful, whether they're themes, whether they're definitive statements, whether they're descriptions, okay? And so if you stick to a methodologist, follow their how-to, use their same terms that they're using, okay? So again, if somebody's using Moustakis, I don't necessarily want to see maybe categories, but I would want to see, he takes you through horizontalization, which is essentially coding, okay? And you categorize those codes into non-repetitive groupings, right, which would be categories. And then you condense those categories to see relationships, which comes up with themes. And then from those themes, you create more of those definitive statements. And so again, that's his particular method. We're not going to go that deep. We're going to do just a general thematic analysis. And so we would begin with the coding process, okay? So when we're going through the coding process, what you do with your transcripts is you divide out the text segments or what's important. Okay, so you read what's been typed and you're asking yourself, what is the segment about? Okay. You would then assign a code word, and when I say word, it can be 1, 2, or 3 words. That's usually what's going on in that statement or that sentence. Now, the text segments can be a sentence, right? It can be a couple sentences. It can be a paragraph. Okay, so you're trying to take all those words, you're trying to condense them down. There's specific types of coding and different ways of coding. And so again, but the purpose again is having you, the researcher, go through line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and breaking that down and saying, what is this about? And then assigning a code word. Vivo coding is where you use an exact word of the participant. And so Vivo coding is something that most students refer to because it's more concrete, right? So if your research participant is saying, Peru is really exciting, I was so excited, you know, and you're looking at that text segment and you're like, what's going on here? And you were using Vivo coding, you might say excitement, okay? So you might use that exact word of the participant. As you get more experience with data analysis, I think sometimes your codes might be more interpretive, okay, as opposed to on the surface where you're just using that exact word. Creswell uses the term quote And so he can go back and possibly use to justify his themes. Okay, and so when you're assigning a code word, he might quote out specific statements that he could use. And so when he doesn't go through necessarily the coding process per se, he might highlight some codes, but then he's going to take those codes and write a theme, right, to justify or to justify his responses. And so again, when you're looking at the Creswell-Baez book, it's a little different than this process that I'm sharing with you. So you want to code the entire transcript. This is where you highlight passages that may assist in answering your research questions. How you highlight those is up to you. Again, on the left-hand margin or somewhere, you would be able to make a list of all of your codes. So what's going on in those particular statements. When you get a list of all those codes, it's not uncommon for students to have maybe 500 code words, right? And so this is where you just copy and paste or transcribe every single code word that you have. And then you need to condense the codes. Okay, so you don't want to work with 500 codes. I believe Creswell talks about working with maybe 30 codes at a time. I have had students that have worked with about 100 codes and have made that work. And so again, it's really easy to come up with a different code word for every single line for every single transcript. But the purpose, again, of condensing the codes is to go back and reduce that data to make it more manageable. So if I have a code of excitement, right? And then later on, I have a code of, or a statement that was, I was really nervous because I had never traveled internationally before. And so maybe I coded that nervous, right? Or, and then I had another statement that was, we passed a group of people who were only speaking Spanish, and I didn't understand what was saying, and it was dark outside, and I became a little frightened. And then I coded that as frightened or scared. Okay, and so as I'm going through my 500 codes, I'm thinking to myself, could those be reworded to emotions? And so that would help reduce or condense that list of 500 codes if I just simply said emotions and change the code word of excited, scared, nervous, and I just made them more broad into a term emotions. Okay, so that would be the purpose of condensing your codes. As you're condensing the codes, then you'll want to go back to your data and say, is there anything missing? My condensed codes, my list of condensed codes, which again, hopefully you're taking about 500 down to like 50 or something along those lines, even less than that, if you will. Is there anything that isn't accounted for? Okay, and so you want to make sure that nothing gets dropped off. So Creswell talks about then once you get your list of codes and you dwindle them down and you condense them, then Creswell discussed going right to writing themes in the right-hand margin. And so those themes are more about describing, summarizing, and interpreting what's occurring where he is making that code, okay? And so this gets confusing because his theme is not his end game, right? And so with a general thematic analysis, our end game, where we want to end, is going to be a thematic statement. And so Creswell's describing that he goes from codes to themes, but they're not thematic statements, okay? Those themes that he has are more descriptions of the codes or interpretations of those codes, okay? So let's look at an example, or at his example on page 166 to 167. Again, this would be in the Creswell-Baez book. And so he has his transcription there. And again, I'm going to have you refer to this. You have your book, and the left-hand side of his margins, he has his codes, right? And if he thinks he's going to use a quotation to help support his statements or his analysis, he writes the word quote there. So that cues him that he might be actually using that quote in his writing. So then he's, explaining, how am I going to code this section? How am I going to code this section? And so, he's using codes, and you can kind of take a look at how he's coding that. But then his themes, right, on the right-hand side of the margin, they're more summaries, okay, or descriptions of what's occurring. And so hopefully when you look at the example, you can sort of see that process for him. And again, we usually, I would argue that with thematic analysis, okay, the general thematic analysis, we group the codes, so we organize them into what we would call categories, okay? And so, and we'll kind of get to this, but the purpose of Creswell's codes is to summarize or provide interpretation of what's going on, okay? That's the purpose of categorizing in this general analysis. And so the general analysis, the one we're going to be doing in class, we want to reduce the number of codes to eliminate redundancy. Okay, and so again, we're trying to reduce that data. So we're trying to condense those codes into something more manageable. So again, that might be going through our code list and say, can this be condensed with another word? Or can these 10 codes be described as something else? And we have those listed as codes. Once you get that idea and you have a nice workable laundry list of your code words, this is where, again, Creswell uses themes to help organize those code words. Other authors, such as Day and Richards, call this condensing the codes into categories. And from a lot of the research that comes out of our department, I see faculty doing codes, lumping those codes or organizing those codes into categories. Okay, and then those categories form thematic statements. Okay, and so again, your reading assignment for Creswell does things a little differently, but I'm hoping you understand the concept is the same. Creswell's using themes, okay? We use the term categories. So when we're looking at codes, okay, we want to lump them into something. So we want to summarize them. We want to group them and then summarize what is that group meaning. Okay, and so the category should help you identify a particular story. So say you have 50 code words, they're random words. Okay, if you put those words together in different ways and group them together, do those words in that group, can you think of a name, a word that describes what all those codes are saying? Okay, and I'll show you some examples of that coming up. Creswell, again in your reading, talks about using a concept map to which he shows you how he's going to write his theme passage. Okay, now that's not his theme, right? It's his theme passage. That's his finding, okay? What we're going to do is find maybe relationships that occur within the categories. And by identifying what relationships exist between those words, between those categorical words, that may help us identify what our theme is, our thematic statement, our end game, okay? So when I talk about theme passages, this is our end game. This is what we want to take those 500 pages of interview data, right? And we want to dwindle it down to code words. We're building it back up into categories. We're looking at how do those categories form relationships, what's going on with those categories to make these overarching descriptions, thematic statements, okay, that the researcher or that the researchers, not researchers, the participants, the researcher participants experienced. We want their voices to be heard. We want to explain what they experienced and how they experienced it. So they call that, the qualitative researchers call that thick and rich description. And so it's a really descriptive summary of what was being studied, okay? Your thematic statement should incorporate, likely will incorporate some of your code words or even some of your categories. And when you're writing the results of your study, you may actually, when you come up with those thematic statements, you'll be breaking apart that thematic statement and using quotations directly from your data to support those thematic statements. So when you're reading the results section of a qualitative study, you should see the mix between the author's voice and how they intertwine the voices of their participants. It really quite is beautiful. And so again, using those direct quotes make it interesting to the reader, makes it really real to the reader. I get such a kick out of when students present at the research colloquium a qualitative study and they're sharing specific direct quotes from their participants, right? Sometimes those quotes are so real because they're right from the participant's mouth. And there have been times over the years with really good qualitative studies where the audience gasps at the reality of the direct quotes. And so those direct quotes make it so powerful. And again, the aim of qualitative research is to share the point of view from the participant themselves. So Creswell is, let's see here, he goes through his own process of creating a conceptual map on how he gets to his theme passages, and they tell a narrative story. And so he literally would be reporting that theme passage in the findings section or a conclusion of the article. And so you'll see that he has some examples on page 170 in his textbook. And so he doesn't ever really go back to address research questions, okay? And so, again, Creswell's not a phenomenologist, right? He's more of a mixed methodologist. So I take that into consideration when I'm reading his book on coding text data and his analysis. For qualitative research that's strictly qualitative, the whole point of the thematic passages or theme passages should be to sort of explain the research question, okay? And so again, Creswell doesn't necessarily do that, but they do that in a lot of strictly qualitative articles. I'm going to be showing you an example of, again, the article that I wrote with my advisor and how that was published. I provide a figure in my article that shows how I came up with my codes, how I condensed my codes into categories, and how those categories formed themes. And so again, the sake of your assignment for going through this process, we're going to be coding your interviews, coming up with categories in our groups, right? And forming some kind of figure that illustrates what process you went through. So it's something very similar to this. So let's see here. Examples in Canvas. And so this is the article that I published with my preceptor or dissertation chair. The research question was, how and in what ways do past international service learning experiences influence occupational therapists' present personal and professional lives? Okay, so a pretty loaded research question. And so basically I'm looking at the central phenomenon is past ISL experiences, right, on their lives. And so what are they living? And so I'm going to go through how a sample transcript and how I came up with those particular codes. Okay, so let me see, stop sharing. Find my transcript. Okay, zoom it up. Okay, so here's a sample of a transcript, okay? And so I is my interviewee, and this is just a sample. This isn't from the beginning, okay? And then I wrote me because I'm the one interviewing. And so, let's start off with this question that I asked the interviewee. Do you think the people you served benefited in any way? And then this is their direct response. Yeah, definitely. Especially the people we built the wheelchairs for. I'm sure they are obviously still using them. The people that we built the houses for, they are probably still living in that. Yeah, probably did leave an impact. I guess I never thought about that. But we probably did leave an impression, lasting impression, just with providing them with things. And so when I look at that, when I look at those sentences, again, with the coding process, I'm asking myself, what is going on here? What is the participant trying to say? What are they trying to share? So they're talking about their story on building wheelchairs for people, building a house for people, leaving an impact. And so when I'm looking about the significant statements, right, or text statements, I specifically highlighted what I think is happening here, leaving an impact, an impression, a lasting impression by providing them with things. Okay, so I highlighted what I felt was super important out of this. And what is going on here? What is the participant talking about? Well, I feel like they're talking about how they made a difference. And so my code word for that statement might be something like making a difference, okay? Now, students get really, really overwhelmed here and they get a little frustrated because they're like, I wouldn't have coded it that. I would have coded it wheelchair. And then I would have coded that house. Because we have wheelchairs here and we have house here. So then my response would be, well, what's so important about the wheelchair? What's so important about the house? What's the underlying common thing about the house and the wheelchair? Right? What is the participant getting at here? Why is that? Why are they talking about the wheelchair and the house? How is that motivating to them? Or what again is our research question? So how and in what ways? Right? And so again, me being the qualitative researcher, I might code that making a difference. Somebody else might code it as impact. So is that wrong? Making a difference or impact? No, it's splitting hairs, right? The purpose of qualitative data analysis and coding is to make it more manageable. The hard part is when you're doing data and qualitative data analysis in groups. Because remember, we don't want 500 code words. And if I'm coding my own research or my own transcript for my interviewee, and I'm coding it myself, and I'm coding this making a difference, and somebody else is coding their own or a different transcript, and there's something very similar about their underlying thoughts and feelings, and they code it as impact, well, now you have two different code words. And so this is where it's so important for you as a research group whoever is doing the coding, you have to get intercoder agreement. This is where you have to work together, okay, and be on the same wavelength so you don't end up with 500 code words, so that you're using the same types of code words together. So as intercoder agreement, what I might do if I'm coding with another person, and this is what we're coding, okay, I'm going to say, okay, let's look at the first paragraph. Okay, you come up with your code word, I'll come up with my code word. Okay, so we're blah, 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 blah. We're both reading that paragraph. Okay, what's your code word? My code word is impact. Oh, okay, well, my code word is making a difference. Is there any difference, or is there one that's better than the other? Or is there one that's simpler than the other? You know what? Let's do impact. Perfect. So now you both have agreed that a statement like that could be coded as impact. That's intercoder agreement. Now, when you go through other transcripts, perhaps on your own, since you've established intercoder agreement with this one transcript, right, you're more than likely going to be on the same wavelength. So then we go down to the second. Okay, so this is the question I asked. How about in the nursing home and orphanage malnutrition center, where you didn't physically give them something? Okay, I still just think providing them with some sort of entertainment for a little bit even. Maybe they don't remember it, but even still, just for those few hours to give them something to do or make them happy made a difference. And so again, here, how would we code that? Well, is it any different? Is what's going on any different than the statement above? Okay, impact. So again, making a difference, right? She's the research participant is saying, is she saying that she made a difference by providing entertainment for the nursing home, orphanage, malnutrition center? Okay. And again, we're using that in vivo by making a difference because she actually said made a difference. So again, that could be the same, same code. And so now we have, almost a half a page here, or a quarter of a page, okay, with the same code word. So we're trying to condense all this data. Okay, so my question I asked, in those particular places, were those roles similar to your experiences now as an occupational therapist? So this is where I'm trying to get more in my research question, right? How and in what ways do OTs utilize, what was my research question? See, this is why we always have to have it in our head. How and in what ways do past ISL experiences influence OTs' present personal lives? I'm trying to get back to my share screen here. My transcript. There we go. So I think as an OT now, we have a little bit more resources and things, more equipment, but I'll just go back to the wheelchair part of it. I can apply that. It's more applicable to my practice now. And so what's going on here? Again, with my research question, how has a past ISL contributed to current practice or current personal life? She's saying, part of her experience that she was talking about was fixing wheelchairs for people, okay? And how now in her professional practice, she's applying that, right? She's fixing wheelchairs as part of her work. And earlier on in the interview, part of my questioning was, what do you do now for work? What are the different populations you work with as an OT now? So I was able to get some of that contextual pieces earlier on in my interview. And so again, my coding, I'm like, what's going on here? Could I code a wheelchair? I'd like to get a little bit deeper and say exactly what's going on here. Well, what's happening? How is this relating to, okay, fixing wheelchairs is a professional skill, right? It's something that she is attributing she learned for international service that she's using in her practice today. And that's what I wanted to get at. And so that's that professional application. So then she started talking about, you have to make things out of, you just have to make things out of what you have when you're there. But here, if you want something, if you don't have the time to make a hand splint, or it's just not going to be if their contractures are so bad, I can just, take some quick measurements, look in a magazine, make a photocopy, put it on a rehab desk and say, this is what we need to order. So it's just so easy, so easy. So in a way, it's different because you just have more resources here, more money here, whereas there, you use what you have. And so that's a really thick description, right? And so what's happening here? What did she get out of going to international service learning? You have to make something out of what you have when you're there, okay? You use what you have when you're there. And so what's a word that describes that? I would say being resourceful, okay? And so I just plugged resourceful in there and highlighted it. So that's my word, my code word. The other thing is what's happening here? Hand making a splint because contractures are bad. I can take some measurements, order it in a magazine, make a photocopy. And so what she's talking about there is sort of the differences between her practice in the United States and what they did for international service learning. I chose to code that differences because the whole point of this concept is she's really saying how different it was. The resources are different in international service versus what they are here. So could have I still coded it resources? I think so. Could have I obviously I coded it differences because that's the meaning behind this. She's talking about the differences between current practice and what she learned back then. And so then I'm listening to her and she's comparing and contrasting. And I'm like, okay, well, if it was so different, I wonder if I could ask her specifically, right? So what she's talking about here is for international service learning, you have to make things out of what you have. Now, as an OT, I'm thinking, and she's talking about how it's different in current practice because she can just order stuff. Well, I'm telling you, one of the skilled nursing facilities where I worked, they were on a very tight budget. They did not let me order stuff like that, right? I had to justify, I had to write a PO, I had to take measurements, it would have taken less time for me to fabricate something and to put it on the resident than it would be for me to go through all the hoops to get them something, okay? And so I'm thinking, as a international service learning participant, as a student, having to make things out of nothing, I remember having to do the same thing in a nursing home here in the United States, here in North Dakota, okay? And so my next question was sort of an add-in question. And again, it's open-ended. Has there ever been a time, well, I guess it's closed-ended, okay? Because it's ad-lib, right? It's ad-libbed. Because she could have said no, but then I probably will follow up with an open-ended question. So I'm asking, has there ever been a time in your practice where you've had to use what you've had? So, oh yeah, like with wheelchairs and things, you just have to rig something up. Some splints and things, I've had to use what they had there with outpatient only coming in for a few days. You have to use materials. And I'm thinking, okay, so what's the professional thing here? What's the professional application? Okay, being resourceful. Has she ever had to problem solve situations in practice? Yeah, you had to rig something up. To me, that could be coded resourceful. That could be coded problem solving. Some things I've had to use what they've had with outpatient coming in a few days. You just have to find the materials you have. And so that's her being resourceful, trying to find stuff. Maybe there's a better splinting material you could use, but it would take, long to order it. So you just use what you have. And so to me, those different statements are about problem solving, about being resourceful. So that's how I chose to code it. Okay. So those are some examples of how I would code this. So I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to go to a laundry list of my codes. And this is small print, and so hopefully you can zoom in. And so this was a laundry list of the codes that I worked with. You can see here I have making a difference. I have resourceful. I'm trying to think what other. Professional application. And so I literally made a laundry list of these code words and I thought, I wonder if there's any I could condense, okay? And so from our laundry list of codes, I had to sort of organize these code words and organize them into different categories. So the categories are offering some interpretation, some explanation, some summary, summarizing what these code words have in common, okay? So when I'm looking at all the code words, what stood out to me is anxiety, feeling appreciative, unsure, being emotional, empathy, guilty, happy, making a difference, safety. What do all of those things have in common? Okay, and for me, all of those different code words, to summarize them all, came down into feelings and emotions. Okay, to me, that was summarizing what all of those code words had in common. When I get further down, we have communication barrier, culture, differences, new, environment, location, schedule. So when I'm looking at all of those code words, okay, I know my data, I'm the one that coded them. And so I'm thinking, what are my participants talking about with communication barrier? Why was that important? Why were they talking about that? What about culture? How can I summarize that? They kept comparing and contrasting, like how is it different down there versus how is it different here? A lot of new experiences, right? This was new to me. I have never experienced that. The location was new to me. I've never had a schedule like that before. I've never had to be on such a tight schedule, or in that case, the schedule was very loose because we were in a different country, right? And so all of those code words, what they were talking about was that these were new experiences in some way. They had never had a communication barrier before with language. They had never experienced this culture before. They identified many differences to what they were used to, and that was a new experience for them. Obviously, new is a very new experience. The environment, okay. We had volcanoes around us. We had the ocean. We had the weather. All of that environment was, I'd never experienced that before. And so all of that was new experiences. Okay, and so you go through and you're organizing these codes right? And you're like, how can we plop them into, or how can we organize them into meaningful categories that maybe summarize this lump of codes? And sometimes, making a difference. So I categorize that with feelings and emotions because of their nonverbal body language. They were like, we really made a difference. And I just wanted to go to make a difference. And I didn't really know if I could, but I really think we did. I really think we made a difference. And that's all I really wanted to do. And so hearing that that nonverbal body language in their interviews, I was like, well, that's a feeling and an emotion. That made them very emotional. I even had some that got teary-eyed. And they did this 10 years ago. So to me, that felt like it was part of a category. But what also was that meaning behind it? So making a difference with the people they were working with, right? And so for me, that also felt in what we made a difference for those people because we built them a house, right? And when we built them a house, they were there with us helping, and we were mixing concrete, and they were so appreciative. And when we finished that project, they were crying and we were crying, and we really made a difference. Now they don't have to sleep on cardboard on the ground, right? And so it was very emotional, but they talked about that personal relationship of working together for that common good, and how that was. And so that also, you can sometimes see codes that are in a couple different places with those categories. That's okay. So the next step then of our data analysis is going to be, okay, how do we come up with these thematic statements? Again, the thematic statements are aimed at answering your research question. They're aimed at maybe finding relationships amongst the categories or amongst the code words, and sort of summarizing what it is that all of those participants, or most of the participants, experienced. Okay. And so when I looked at all of the categories, I'm like, new experiences caused a lot of emotions. Some of those new experiences of experiencing a different culture made some people unsure. Okay. Having that communication barrier caused a lot of anxiety. Being in a new environment, okay, there were some issues with safety and some fear that went along with that. Having a not set in stone schedule caused some feelings of being unsure. And so to me, with time, it became very evident that these new experiences and being involved in so many new experiences as a student caused a variety of different emotions, some happy, sad, glad, anxious, right? And so that ended up being a theme in and of itself. And so I have to sort of word my thematic statement as sort of, what did my participants experience and how did they experience it? So participants reported encountering many new experiences during their international service learning and voiced a variety of emotions they felt during their experiences. Okay? So that's the connection. The new experiences they experienced caused a variety of emotions, pretty broad. So how does that answer my research question though? Okay, so again, research question, how and in what ways do past ISL experiences influence occupational therapists' present, personal and professional lives? So I added another sentence. Okay, I added, when thinking about their past ISL experiences, all of the participants reported feeling grateful and appreciative of what they have in their current lives. Bingo. Okay. So my thematic statement here And the thing that came about with my analysis is, what did they experience? They experienced new experiences. They shared that, they experienced that by sharing how many different emotions they felt. And feeling those different emotions and having those new experiences of knowing people that don't have a home, knowing there are people in the world that don't have a home, knowing there are people out there in the world who don't have food to eat, knowing there are people out there in the world who don't get therapy, knowing there are people in the world who live in skilled nursing facilities with dirt floors, where their families have to come in and take care of them, or they don't get taken care of. Well, how did that affect their personal or professional lives? Well, they explained how grateful and appreciative of what they have in their current life, because they know it could be a whole heck of a lot worse. So that's what this theme is trying to get at. And that's what I feel like it captures. I'm not going to go into the results section, okay, because we'll be covering that later. But I have this article posted for you. And so this is just a neat example of how the results, theme 1, new experiences create a variety of emotions, how I embed those direct quotes, right? And so 7 of the participants shared that they've never traveled outside the country before. 4 shared that they were anxious about their safety prior to the trip. And then I'm embedding a quotation in there to justify that. Like, one participant explained how they felt before the experience. I was worried about our safety and how it was going to be. You just have to be careful, and you never know what could happen anywhere. That's with going anywhere. Okay, you always have to have safety in the back of your mind or something like that. And so again, we'll cover results later. But had I not had the direct quotes that supported this, I wouldn't be able to have this theme. Okay. So again, for the sake of your assignment, you're going to go through interviewing your peers. Okay. You're going to be looking at your transcripts. You're going to work as a group, because with qualitative data, it's about getting a lot of interviews together. Okay. You'll cover intercoder agreement. You'll code some together, kind of get through the process. You might be able to branch off and finish coding your transcripts. When you're done coding each of your transcripts, you come together as a group. You look at, okay, I coded it happy, you coded it joyful. Could we change it to happy? Okay, are there any other codes we could condense? Okay, now let's look at the codes and let's try and see if we can't summarize them into different categories to further reduce them. Okay, from there, are there any relationships that are occurring within these categories that all of our participants talked about or explained that also answer the research questions? Okay. So that's an example of, let's see here, coding, how I would code a transcript. Going back to my PowerPoint here. Okay. How I would code an example of maybe how a transcript could look. I know for my research groups in the past, they have emailed me their transcribed interviews. I had double spaced them and I had printed them. That way we had hard copies to actually highlight, right? And actually write code words in the margins, write notes, those kinds of things, or those hunches that we were thinking about, or like, oh, this really answers our research question, or this is a very powerful quote. Okay, and so we marked it all up. I wish I still had I think I have them somewhere still because it was pretty powerful. But nonetheless, your research preceptors, we all kind of have our own way. Those of us who do qualitative data analysis, we all kind of have our own way of how we do it. And so this is a very general way. This is how I have done it. Creswell, again, I think his process is very similar to what I showed you, but it's not the same. When you go through and you look at why they're not all the same, it's because you have all of these people who are methodologists, and they all do it their own special way. And so it's okay that we all do it a little differently. We're going to practice the way I do it for a class assignment. Please don't get frustrated if your research preceptor does it a different way. This is why they do it in a different way. They're using a different methodologist is all, or they have additional experience in doing it, okay, or a different experience in doing it. There's many different ways, but the outcome is the same. The outcome is sharing the participants' voices. I get a lot of anxiety, a lot of questions about, I'm not agreeing with my research partner here because I wouldn't code it that way. It doesn't necessarily matter. Remember, it's about going through the process. So let's not split hairs about, I want the code word to be happy and you want the code word to be joyful. I'm not giving because mine is happy and you're not giving because you're saying yours is joyful. And so it is, right? The purpose of coding, again, is to break down the data. Does it matter about code words? No, the code words, coming up with the code words is a process to break down the data and to simply make it more manageable. So again, it's about going through the process of data reduction, organizing the data, and building it up to make those statements or claims for the voices of your participants. Okay. Writing the results, again, I'm not going to get into this too much. In your, when you write the results, you might refer to them as findings, or you might refer to them as results. Again, with your thematic passage or your theme passages, you'll likely will embed different quotes. And I'll cover this next spring with you guys. You likely will need a visual representation of your theme development. And so this could be a figure. And this is what I'm going to push you guys to do for this class assignment. I have seen some really neat conceptual maps, which basically, and Creswell has some conceptual maps to show the readers how he gets to a certain point and what process he follows. Again, it's about the process, okay? Your quotes must support the themes, or you must support the themes by using maybe participant quotes. Some qualitative research, again, will actually embed additional literature in with the quotations. And so there usually is I like to think of it as a formula for writing up your themes. And I'm not going to cover that today because we're not necessarily writing a results section. We're just doing data analysis, okay? What's helpful though is when we do a literature review in qualitative article, we do it at the beginning, again, to try and broaden your perspective of the topic. And when we write our results, we're probably going to be talking about how our results or how our themes compare to what's in the literature. Okay, and so it really is powerful if a lot of our themes come out being very similar, or we can find articles that justify what it is that we're saying. So in a qualitative article, the lit review is really important at the end. Once you've gone through and you know what your results are, now you have to go back to the literature again, okay? So again, it's really important that you're organizing your literature so you can find them again. When you're done writing the results section, you'll write the discussion section. The discussion section is going to be your interpretations, your conclusion, maybe findings, how they relate to the literature, implications to practice, your suggestions for future research. Okay, and again, I'm not going to cover the discussion section. We're covering that next spring. So I always want students to know that with qualitative data, we have to consider validity, reliability. A lot of times it's trustworthiness. Okay, triangulation, a full lit review, okay, before interviews, taking field notes on those observations during the interviews. Okay, so we're using those multiple strategies to strengthen the credibility of our data. Doing member checks. Okay, so when we finish that preliminary data analysis, we reach out to some of our participants again, those who have agreed to it, and we find out if they agree with our analysis or if there's something additional they think we should add. When we conduct our interviews, we would hope that we would reach a level of saturation, meaning that as we're conducting interviews, things are starting to sound redundant and there's no new information that we're gleaning from any additional participants. Reflexivity is usually making sure we're aware of our own biases, right? So for your class project, interviewing peers, okay? Looking at your occupational participation. We want to hear from your peers. Is there any bias that could impact the quality, the reliability, or the validity of what is being shared? Okay, and so that's reflexivity is, okay, I'm a student also, I'm experiencing the same thing. I have to make, so I could be biased. So I have to make sure I'm using open-ended questions so I'm not imposing my assumptions. I have to make sure that when the participant is saying, oh, you know what I mean, right? You're saying, well, I would like to hear it from your perspective. Can you please tell me, or can you please elaborate on that? And so asking those probing questions, making sure you're actually hearing from the participant. That's also another way of just being aware of what those biases could be and putting strategies in place. That's reflexivity, okay? Conducting an audit trail. So that's your how-to list and your to-do list, okay? And so if another researcher wants to pick up and continue your qualitative study, they should be able to follow your audit trail, okay? Or if somebody is saying, you committed research fraud, I don't believe your participants actually said that, you can actually go back to your transcripts and you can show them the process of your data analysis and your research methods and everything that you did to show that, yes, this was how we came up with that result by following this process. Again, it's about the process. Peer debriefing, okay? And so you guys have access to peers. Talk about, oh, that interview didn't go so well. I think we could maybe tweak the question a little bit next time we give an interview. Okay, yes, let's do that. What are you thinking so far with the interviews? Do you think that, oh, this one really said a really powerful quote. Do you remember that? Yeah, I remember that. We have to make sure we mark that. Let's jot that down somewhere so we remember to quote that when we transcribe their interview. Okay, picking each other's brains like that, problem solving, that's peer debriefing. Okay, and so I feel like a lot of these different methods are meant to help establish and maintain the reliability and validity of a qualitative study, and they have to be implemented throughout the study, okay? All right. So for our next class period, we will actually be, you'll be bringing your transcript to class. You'll be breaking up into your groups. You already hopefully have your groups. You're going to pick one transcript, okay? And everybody is going to practice that, coding that together. What would you code that statement together? What would you code that statement as? What would you code that statement as? Okay, so you're gonna, excuse me, go through that all together. That's that intercoder agreement, okay? That should be on trustworthiness review. Okay, that's making sure that your codes, you all agree upon them, and so that's affecting the reliability and validity of your data, okay, by having that intercoder agreement. You don't have to do the whole transcript yourself, okay? Maybe you all want to sit around, pull up your transcript that you did, and maybe do the first page together, okay, on each of them, and say, okay, this is what I think is going on here. I would code it as that. Since we're all following a very similar interview protocol, you would think that the same types of responses, right, would be on that same page. And so that would give you, I think, a good step on that intercoder agreement. So again, if you're comfortable, you can practice coding your own transcript once you kind of get the feel how you all are going to code together. Once you get a list of those code words, or once you code your whole transcript, okay, then you put your codes into a laundry list from everybody in your group. Okay, so that means if you have 5 people in your group, you get their code words, 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 your code words. Okay, and you just type them all out, and then you're going to look at that, and you're going to condense the code words that could be redundant. So you're going to say, hey, you know what? I have happy, I have joyful, I have, that could just be happy. Great, that saves 2 code words down into 1. We have anxious, we have nervous, we have unsure, we have, okay, can that just be condensed into uncertainty, okay, or something like that? And so again, that's 3 code words condensed back into 1. And so you'll be going through that with each other and sort of reducing those codes. Once you reduce all of those codes, this is where you sort of take them in. And what's going on with these different code words? How can they be organized? What summaries, categories, what words can we use that summarizes or explains groups of these code words? Okay, so you'll come up, once you come up with that non-redundant, non-repetitive list of code words, you'll organize them into categories. Okay, again, I have that example for you in that article, International Service Learning article. And then you're going to try and write your theme passages. Okay, I would anticipate maybe hopefully helping you with maybe your theme passages. I think if you look at the examples or the example that I have written, you'll kind of get an idea of they're sort of explaining the how or what is being experienced, right? And then sort of looking at it through the lens of your research question. Okay, and so making sure these theme passages are answering your research question. I think in the couple years I've been doing this, that's where I think the students, they kind of get caught up on a story and they kind of go off and their theme passage doesn't relate to the research questions, okay? So to prove, for you to meet the accreditation standard of compiling, analyzing, synthesizing qualitative data, what I'd like you to do is to create a table or figure that takes me through the codes, categories, and themes. Okay, so the one that I have in my article that I'm sharing with you, that's what I want to see. I want to see you taking me through that process. Okay, and again, that can be a template. You can use that template as part of my article, or that's in my article. Again, you'll probably want to review your APA format for creating tables and figures. And so that's what we're going to be doing in class next time we meet. So make sure that you have your interview, your transcript, those sorts of things. Make sure you have that ready to go, because this is going to be all hands on deck. So we can hopefully code, figure out categories, and come up with themes. All right, any questions? Please let me know. Please use these resources. I think just another resource that I want to point out is my the reading assignment. Okay, the reading assignment. I have it somewhere here. Documents. Okay, where did it go? Okay, phenomenological analysis. So this is part of your reading assignment. This is in one of my resources that I found to be really helpful in helping me understand why there are so many different strategies out there. And so here we have 5 different phenomenological methodologies. Again, I summarize these in your PowerPoint for you, but I want you to embrace that, again, your research preceptor might do things a little differently than what we're doing in class here, or they may not. They may do something very similar. But if they're doing something different, okay, there's 5 different ways, right? There's different methodologists that outline different ways. And so if somebody does it a little bit differently, they're likely using something, or they're likely interpreting something from a more famous methodologist. Okay, so the idea of using a specific methodologist, again, is to get us to the end game, get us to the end point, to take us through the process. And so it doesn't matter which one you use. What matters in qualitative research is going through the process, right? As you're going through the process, things are going to emerge and you're going to get your end result, no matter which one you use, okay? And so I like these charts. I kind of had to piecemeal them together because they were on different pages. But they're comparing and contrasting the different methodologists with their terminology that they use. And so I found this fascinating. I found it really interesting. Again, it's a really good resource for you in your future, or if you want to use a methodologist, a particular methodologist in your research, or if you want to share a particular methodologist with your research preceptor, those kinds of things. And so again, it's just a really good reference that compares and contrasts, and probably provides you some explanation on perhaps why, when we're looking at phenomenology and qualitative, how it can be a little bit gray or different for different researchers, because there's different methods out there. It's not like a pre and post test, right? It's not like a t-test. It's all these different people have their own opinions and their own ways of doing things. And that's why. All right, thank you very much. Again, let's get to analyzing our qualitative data. See you soon.